Let's talk about trigonometric ratios and how we can use them to solve problems with triangles. So there's three common trig functions that are really useful to help us solve things with triangles, and they are sine, tangent, and cosine. So the ratios that have to do with these three functions are sine of x equals opposite over hypotenuse, tangent of x equals opposite over adjacent, and cosine of x equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So, what this means is if we have x here, well, let me just write out an example. So, let's say we have a house. I'm going to do the classics example here. We have a house, we have a ladder, we don't know how far away from the house to put the ladder, but we do know that 45 degrees is the angle and the ladder is 12 feet. So we can't use the Pythagorean theorem here because we only know one side of the triangle. But we can use trig functions to find this unknown side. So this is the angle here that we're talking about. So to the right of it is the hypotenuse, because the hypotenuse is the side opposite of the right angle. So we have the hypotenuse and we have the adjacent side to the angle. The adjacent side is the side that's next to the angle that's not the hypotenuse. So we have adjacent and hypotenuse. Which ones of these have adjacent and hypotenuse? That is cosine. So I would use cosine. Cosine of 45 degrees equals, and let me pull it up here, cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent is x, we don't know what that is. Hypotenuse is 12. So then we multiply both sides by 12 and we get 12 times cosine of 45 degrees equals x. So then you just plug that into a calculator. You need to make sure your calculator is in degrees mode and not in radians. That's pretty important. But when you type that in, you should get x equals 8.49 feet. These are in feet. So basically 8.5 feet from the house is how far you should put it if you want to have a 45-degree angle and have your ladder exactly fit from the ground to the roof. So another kind of problem we could do is if we don't know the angle and we want to find out what the angle is, but we know what two sides of the triangle are. So let's say this side is 6 and this side is 13. So if we want to know what is x, if the Pythagorean theorem still does not help us because it tells us about the sides of the triangle and not the angles. So in this case, we look at the opposite side and the hypotenuse. Opposite and hypotenuse, that would be sine of x is opposite over hypotenuse. So sine of x equals, opposite is 6, hypotenuse is 13. So we know sine of x is 6 over 13, which is, if you want to put it in decimal form, about 0.46. And if you want to be exact, you could do the inverse sine. X equals the inverse sine of 0.46. That would be a button on your calculator. Inverse sine of 0.46 is 27.4. about 27.4 degrees. So depending on how exact you want to be, you could just write it's 0.46. Well, sine of x is 0.46, or x exactly is 27.4 degrees, or, approximately, not exactly. So let's talk about some good ways to remember the different functions, ratios, sorry. Got sine, cosine, and tangent. So some people think of it as SOHCAHTOA, because sine is opposite over hypotenuse, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent is opposite over adjacent. I think of it as sino, cosina, and tanoa. SOHCAHTOA, sino, cosina, tanoa, or just memorize it. I'm not sure, whichever way is easier for you. But that's how you can use trig functions to solve problems with triangles.